I remember the shore, not because it was beautiful, it wasn't, but because it was the last place where the ground didn't move beneath my feet. The sky was bright and too large. The sun felt like it had something to prove. And I was trying not to think. They said it was a job. Work on the sea, they said. Good coin, they said. They didn't mention the chains, or the screams, or the stench. But maybe that was the fine print. The docks were loud. Not like markets or festivals. More like birth and death, happening at the same time. Wood creaked. Ropes snapped tight. Men shouted. Men obeyed. I was one of the latter. The ship was massive, not elegant, more like a floating coffin carved by someone who hated beauty. It smelled like tar, fish, sweat, and wet wood, and something else, something human. They called her La Fortuna, which was either a joke or a threat, because no one who boarded looked lucky, especially not the ones already below deck. I was hired as a deckhand, which meant I didn't get whipped as quickly as the others, but eventually pain makes its rounds. It's democratic like that. Before boarding, I was given a rope, belt, a tin cup, and a warning. The belt didn't hold anything. The cup wasn't for drinking, and the warning, don't go below unless you're told. I didn't ask why. Some doors are better left unopened, until you're shoved through them. The captain stood at the top of the gangplank. He didn't speak, didn't wave, he just stared down, like he was already tired of all of us, ... And we hadn't even left the shore. I took my first step onto the ship. The wood groaned beneath me, or maybe I groaned. It felt like crossing a line, not into the sea, but out of forgiveness. Behind me, the last cries of the port faded. Children yelling, wives bargaining, men lying, normal things, honest things. Soon they'd be replaced by other sounds, worse ones, ones you don't hear with your ears. We raised the sails. I say we, but I barely knew how to tie a knot. Still, when enough people shout at you, you learn fast, or you fall. As the shoreline shrank behind us, I felt lighter, not freer, just detached, like my name stayed back there, and I was something else now, something less complicated, something disposable. That night, I slept on deck, stars above, salt on my lips, a rope for a pillow, and below me, a wooden belly filled with secrets. I wasn't ready to understand yet. I wasn't supposed to go below, but curiosity is louder than rules, especially when rules are whispered through clenched teeth, by men who've stopped looking you in the eye. So one morning, before sun, I opened the hatch, and I went down. The air changed immediately. It didn't just smell, it pushed, a damp, thick pressure, like breath that had been used, and used again, by too many lungs, and too few prayers. I descended the ladder slowly, each step a warning, each creak a voice saying, turn back, you're not made for this. But I kept going. Maybe I wanted to know, maybe I needed to, or maybe I was just stupid. The light was almost nothing, a single lantern, barely a glow, but I could make out shapes, rows, not beds, not crates, bodies, so many, more than my brain could count. Without losing the will to continue, they were packed, laid down, side by side, naked or near enough, chained at the ankles. Some had eyes open, some didn't. Some blinked at me, like they still believed I was real, that I might help. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move, just stood there, in the thick of other people's sweat and despair, feeling my own skin crawl, because it still had the privilege of being dry. A child coughed, sharp, desperate. The sound echoed between ribs and timber, like a nail tapping on a coffin lid. No one reacted. They were used to it, or too tired to care. A man lifted his head, eyes sunk so far in. They looked like two small regrets staring back. He didn't say anything, just looked ... Not hate, not hope ... Just the heavy weight of someone cataloguing your face. In case it ever matters later, it wouldn't. Flies moved across skin like currency. Some men scratched, some didn't. Some lay completely still breathing, I think. The worst part wasn't the smell. It wasn't the chains. It wasn't even the silence. It was the sound of breathing. Dozens of bodies, all breathing together, in rhythm, a rhythm that said, "We're still here, but only just." I turned, started climbing back up, halfway up the ladder. I vomited, silently, into the dark. No one noticed, or they did, and didn't care. I didn't blame them. Above deck, the air felt like forgiveness, almost. I leaned over the railing, let the sea spray hit my face, like a slap that didn't leave a mark. I wiped my mouth, stared at the horizon, and tried not to remember what was right beneath my feet. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I wasn't tired, but because I was afraid. My dreams might take me back down there, and worse, that I wouldn't come back up. I didn't speak to the captain, not at first. No one did. He wasn't the kind of man you approached. He was the kind of man you noticed, and then pretended you hadn't. He stood at the stern most mornings, back straight, hands behind him, eyes fixed on nothing and everything. He didn't give orders out loud. He gave stares, and stares go deeper than shouts. The first time he looked at me, really looked at me, I felt it in my spine. It wasn't hate, wasn't judgment. It was something colder, as if he was measuring how much of me was worth saving. If things went bad, he wore a coat too fine for the deck. Dark wool, clean boots, no stains ... As if the filth of the world was smart enough to avoid him. Once I saw him speak to the quartermaster, just a few words. The next day, a man vanished. No explanation, no one asked. Even the waves didn't comment. There were rumors ... that he'd once captained a navy ship, that he'd been court-martialed, that he'd made a deal with something darker than the sea. But the truth was worse, because it was unknowable. He never went below deck, never looked anyone in the eyes too long, as if staring too deep might reflect something he wasn't ready to see ... or something that might stare back. He smoked a pipe with no tobacco, just the act of smoking, just the motion, like a habit kept alive, to fill the space where humanity used to be. I tried to mimic him once, stood at the rail, hands behind my back, silent. It lasted 5 seconds. I didn't feel powerful. I felt small, smaller than I'd ever felt, smaller than the men below, smaller than the wood holding me up. He passed by me one afternoon, stopped, looked, and said, "Don't look for meaning in this, just that," then walked away. I wanted to ask what this meant. The ship, the voyage, the cargo, me, but I didn't, because I think I already knew. That night, I dreamed of his eyes. Not angry, not sad, just watching, like the sea itself had borrowed a man's body to remind us that it was never on our side. After that, I stopped trying to understand the captain and started wondering if he was still trying to understand himself, or if he'd given that up long before the ship was even built. You'd think you'd hear them, the ones below, but you don't. Not really, not the way you'd expect. It's not the screams that haunt you, it's the way they don't make it to the surface. Like the ship itself swallows them. Sometimes, late at night, you'd hear something, not a voice, more like pressure, a sound that pressed against the wood, like guilt, soft, moist, persistent. One night, it came louder, a thump, then another, then silence, then a scream, not sharp, not wild, not controlled, like someone trying to scream, without alerting God. I lay awake, eyes open, watching the stars blink in judgment. The scream stopped, but the silence that followed was somehow worse, because it had absorbed the shape of it, and now it lived in me. The next morning, the hatch remained closed. Someone had chained it from above. The crew avoided eye contact. No one asked why. That was the rule. If you didn't see it, it didn't happen. But I saw the stain near the base of the mast. A line of blood, too thin to be fresh, too dark to be ignored. It wasn't dramatic, just present. Like a signature left behind by pain. At breakfast, if you could call it that, one man whispered. They tried to dig through, another replied. Then let M dig into the ocean, and they laughed. But not like it was funny, like they had to laugh, or they'd scream too. That day, the sun was relentless, not warm, oppressive, like a witness that chose to burn instead of speak. I tried not to listen anymore, but you don't need ears to hear certain things. Pain has a way of entering through the soles of your feet, especially when it's beneath you, especially when it has nowhere else to go. I started walking differently, lighter, like maybe if I weighed less, I wouldn't press down so hard on the lives below. Foolish, I know, but guilt rewrites logic. So does helplessness. That night, someone jammed the hatch with a rag to stop the draft, they said. But we knew they were trying to muffle the ship's conscience, trying to keep the nightmares from leaking upward. It didn't work, because even if you plug your ears, the bones remember. And when the ship rocked that night, I swear it moved like something grieving, something complicit, something alive. The storm didn't start with thunder. It started with stillness, the kind that makes sailors look up, the kind that makes the sea look like it's thinking. And that's when you know the ocean is about to remember who's in charge. The wind came next, soft, curious, then furious. The sails snapped like broken promises. Ropes screamed. So did men. And somewhere above it all, the captain stood still, like he'd seen this 1,000 times, and stopped caring at 5. I was ordered to tie down the forward barrels. I tied 2. The third rolled toward me, like it had a grudge, missed me by inches. I laughed, the kind of laugh you feel guilty for, even while it's happening. Rain came sideways, salt in the mouth, salt in the eyes. My skin felt like it was peeling from the outside in. Water pooled at my ankles, and somewhere below deck, you could hear it sloshing against the wood where it didn't belong. Lightning cracked the sky, brief and bright, long enough to make every face look haunted. Like the light remembered who they used to be and was disappointed. Then the mast cracked. Not all the way, just enough to shift the rhythm of the chaos. And in that shift, someone fell. Not me, ... Not a man I knew well, just someone. He hit the deck with a sound that felt wrong, too final, too soft, like a soul quietly leaving a room where it was never invited. We kept working, because we had to, because stopping meant joining him, because the storm didn't care about reverence, it only cared about gravity. When the worst passed, we gathered near the body. No one spoke, no one moved him. He lay face down, arms awkward, fingers curled, like they were still trying to grip something he didn't want to let go. The captain walked over, looked down, then looked at the sea. A moment passed, then he nodded, ... Two men picked up the body, not gently, not cruelly, just efficiently. They didn't say words, didn't offer prayers, just lowered him over the side, into the black. The splash was small, the silence afterward was not. I watched the spot where he disappeared, long after the waves had swallowed him, not because I cared, not because I mourned, but because I knew that water would take us all eventually, and we wouldn't leave ripples either. That night, the sea was calm, too calm, and every creak of the ship sounded just a little bit like that man's name, even though none of us had ever learned it. They did it once a week, sometimes twice, sometimes after storms, sometimes just because the captain didn't blink enough that day. We called it the count, they called it inventory. It started with the hatch creaking open. The light didn't enter, just the sound of footsteps and the click of a tally board being unfolded like a priest opening scripture. Two men descended, one with a lantern, the other with a piece of chalk. The third stayed at the top, pencil in hand, waiting to write. They never spoke to the ones below, just pointed, grunted, nudged with boots. I watched from above once, hidden behind coiled rope, eyes barely blinking. They moved through the rows, like merchants checking stock, touching flesh, like it was fabric ... Counting ribs, not breaths. They marked backs with chalk, a tick if breathing, a circle if not. One body was checked twice, then dragged. The mark didn't change, only its location. They didn't record names. There were no names, only numbers. Line 314 alive, line 412 alive, line 511. That was the rhythm, not of life, but of inventory. One man coughed too hard. They stared. For a moment, he was a question mark. Then he stopped coughing and became a tick again. Just like that, he returned to being merchandise. Later, a crewman laughed and said, "Shame when they die early. Still owe us a full voyage." Like their lungs had violated a contract. Like death was bad business, but not tragedy. The inventory never changed pace. Not even when someone begged. Not even when someone bled. It was the most consistent rhythm on the ship, even more than the waves. One day, I saw the captain reviewing the numbers. He didn't blink, didn't flinch, just nodded once, and walked away. Not like he agreed, not like he cared, just like the math was sound. I asked a senior deckhand once, "What happens when we reach zero?" He stared at me, then smirked. "We never do. We refill." Then he walked off, like he'd just said the weather. After that, I stopped listening to the numbers. but I still heard them, in footsteps, in chains, and in the way. My own breathing began to sound like a tally, waiting to be crossed. I don't remember how I first noticed him. The boy, he wasn't loud, wasn't large, didn't speak, but something about his silence was louder than everything else. He couldn't have been older than 10, maybe 12, hard to tell. Malnutrition plays tricks on the clock. He sat pressed against the hole, knees tucked to chest, eyes like tiny dark questions that had long since stopped expecting answers. I saw him during a maintenance shift. The hatch had been opened for air. We were told to patch a leak near the ballast. I pretended to fix a rope, just to stay and look, not stare, just look, ... Sometimes that's all you can offer. He wasn't crying, wasn't rocking, wasn't even blinking. He was still, but not like peace, more like what comes after fear. When you've used it all up, then it happened. A rat crawled across the beam, paused near the boy's bare foot, and sniffed. The boy didn't move, didn't flinch, just slowly, almost gently, reached out and touched its back. The rat didn't run, they stayed like that. A boy and a rodent, two creatures, numbed by the same air. For a moment, there was no ship, no hunger, no ocean, ... only stillness. Then a crewman shouted. The rat scurried off. The boy didn't follow it, didn't react, just lowered his hand and closed his eyes. Not in pain, not in sleep, in surrender. I thought about that moment all night, ... The way the rat had shown more gentleness than most men I knew, and the boy, he hadn't smiled, hadn't spoken, but in that one touch, I saw more humanity than in all the inventory sheets combined. I asked a cook later, what happens to the little ones? He shrugged. Some make it, most don't. They don't sell well anyway. He wiped his hands, too small to work, too weak to protest. And just like that, he changed the subject. I went back below the next day. The boy was gone. No mark, no sound, no goodbye, just an empty space, where the wood still held the shape of a small back and quiet defiance. And somewhere out there, maybe that rat still remembers him. I hope so, ... Because sometimes a memory is all we get and all we deserve. There's something about salt. It doesn't just stay on the skin, it gets in between the cracks, into the breath, beneath the nails ... Until one day you realize you're no longer sweating. You're leaking the sea. My hands were stiff, knuckles raw, skin like parchment, soaked and dried again and again. They cracked when I moved. They cracked when I didn't. Eventually, I stopped noticing. Pain has a way of becoming background music. The others looked no better. Sun-darkened faces, lips always dry, eyes always squinting at a horizon that never got closer. Some had rashes, some had blisters, all had salt, in their pores, in their food, in their stories. One man scratched his arm until he bled, said it itched like memory. I understood. Salt doesn't just dry skin, it preserves grief, like meat. We were told to bathe once a week, not in fresh water, in buckets of the same sea that already owned us, ... We scrubbed with rags that never dried, spoke with mouths that forgot what sweetness tasted like. I found a mirror once, cracked, tarnished, lying near the officers' quarters. I stared into it, ... Didn't recognize the man. Eyes dull, cheeks hollow, hair stiff with wind and sleep. It wasn't the years that changed me. It was the salt. Below deck, the men fared worse. Salt sores, mouth ulcers, infections that blossomed like dark flowers. Their skin peeled in thin sheets. Sometimes they kept the pieces, held them, folded them, like maybe if they collected enough, they could rebuild themselves on land. One night it rained, hard, fresh water from the sky. No commands needed. We ran to the deck, arms outstretched. Some cried, some laughed. I opened my mouth and drank until my throat burned from something that wasn't the sea. For 10 minutes, we weren't sailors, weren't prisoners, weren't cargo, just bodies, desperate to remember that water didn't always come with chains. Then the sun returned, stronger, crueler, evaporated the mercy, left behind the salt, and the ship creaked, like it had learned nothing. After that, the sea looked different to me, not bigger, not deeper, just more honest. It didn't pretend to care. It just took, and took, and left salt, where skin used to be. They weren't allowed to speak. The ones below, no language, no noise, no song, no story, just breath, just metal, just waiting. But even without words, they spoke, with eyes, with shoulders, with the way they shifted their weight. When the guards passed, there was a rhythm to it, a pattern I didn't understand at first. 1 blink meant yes, 2 meant no. A glance left was warning, a glance right meant a prayer was being sent, though to which God no one ever said. Maybe just to time itself. The chains had their own dialect. Rattles meant movement, tension meant fear, and when everything went silent, that's when you knew something had gone very, very wrong. I watched once from the hatch above. 2 men, barely 20, exchanged a folded strip of fabric, worn, torn, passed palm to palm, like it was treasure. A reminder, maybe, of something softer than this place. They didn't smile, didn't cry, just nodded, and in that nod, I saw more comfort than any sermon I'd heard on land. There were lullabies too, but they weren't sung. They were tapped on wood, on ribs, on the inside of the skull. Rhythms carried across chained ankles and bruised skin, memory disguised as music. Once, a guard kicked a man for humming. I think he was humming. Could have just been breathing funny, Didn't matter. He was quiet for days afterward, not from pain, from mourning, as if his mouth had buried something only he had ever heard. A woman, young skin like carved mahogany, used her fingers to trace symbols on her thigh, over and over. I didn't know the meaning, didn't need to. The motion was the message. I am still me, even here, even now. That stayed with me. How they carried language without letters, how they turned silence into defiance, and how even chains, when shared, became a kind of chorus. After that, every time I heard metal shift, I listened closer, not for noise, not for protest, but for the quiet ways people remind each other they're still human, even when the world forgets. It started with a cough, then another, then 2 more. Not loud, not panicked, just wrong, like music played out of tune by lungs that forgot how to breathe. The fever came fast, and when it came like fire. Skin flushed, eyes glassy, murmurs in the dark. Some shook, some sweated, some just stared, as if waiting for death to introduce itself properly. They called it ship fever. No other name, because naming things makes them personal. And this wasn't personal, it was punishment. Guards stopped going below. Orders were shouted from the hatch. Buckets were lowered, not to clean, just to make the filth shift. The smell didn't shift, it rose. I was ordered to help. "You're young," they said. "You'll survive." I believed them until I saw the first corpse, then the second, then the pile. Hope doesn't live long in piles. One man gripped my wrist as he died. Didn't speak, didn't blink, just held on, as if my skin might be the last thing he ever understood. I let him. What else could I do? They started burning things. Cloth, wooden slats, sometimes bodies. To purify the air, they said. But it wasn't the air that was unclean. It was everything. The smoke curled up the stairs like memory. Sweet, sick, sticky. It stayed in my nose for days. Sometimes I think it still lives there. We lost 17 that week. 17 that we knew of. No names, no prayers, just thrown into the sea. While no one watched, because watching made it real. I didn't get sick. Not really, just enough to worry. Enough to wonder if the heat in my chest was from the sun or something deeper. One night I dreamed the ship caught fire, but no one moved, no one screamed. They just sat in the smoke, quiet, waiting for it to burn through the wood and finally reach their bones. When I woke, the sky was pink and I was still breathing, but everything smelled like it had already burned. Even the wind. Land. Someone whispered it, like it was a secret, like saying it too loud might scare it away. I didn't believe it at first. Then I saw the birds. Birds don't lie. It was faint, a dark smudge on the horizon. Still far, still silent, but real, too real. Because land meant something would end, and something else would begin. The mood on deck changed. Not joy, not relief, something closer to confusion. We'd been floating for so long, even solid ground felt suspicious. One man whispered, "We made it." Another muttered, "Doesn't mean we're free." Neither was wrong. Below deck, the chains rustled more, a rhythm of awakening, the kind that comes when pain pauses just long enough to remember it doesn't last forever. They cleaned us, not with care, with buckets. They shaved the heads of the strongest, scrubbed the faces of the youngest. Not for comfort, for presentation. I helped carry crates to the upper hold, opened one, found iron rings, branding irons, papers I couldn't read, the kind of cargo that explains more than it should. The captain stood at the bow, hands behind his back, just like the first day, the same coat, the same posture, but this time his eyes looked heavier, like even he knew. Land doesn't always mean arrival. Sometimes it means reckoning. Closer now. Palm trees, shacks, flags. Not my flag. Not anyone's flag, really. Just a piece of cloth, meant to say, "You belong to someone now." I caught a glimpse of the boy, the one who touched the rat. His back now marked, not with scars, with chalk. He'd been chosen for something. I hoped it wasn't memory. They lined us up, not like soldiers, like answers to a question. No one asked out loud. A man with a feathered hat counted us, didn't speak, just wrote, "I hate the sound of quill on paper. It makes judgment feel official." The land was closer now. I could smell it. Flowers, smoke, something burnt. But I couldn't tell if it was coming from shore or from us. ... They brought out the ledger. Thick, worn, edges curled like it had been dipped in regret. No one said it, but we knew. This was the final count, not of numbers, of worth. Names were not used. There were no names to begin with, just rows, heights, weights, marks, a system of summaries, a graveyard of detail. One by one, they called us forward, not with voice, with gesture. ... A flick of the hand, a nod, a grunt. If your shadow moved too slowly, someone's boot reminded you. They looked at your teeth, your back, your thighs. They tapped your joints, checked your balance. Not like a doctor, like a buyer. A man sneezed. They marked something beside his number, then sent him to the left. He didn't ask why. No one ever did. There was no why left, only where. The left meant rest, not sleep, the permanent kind. We didn't watch, we weren't supposed to, but it's hard to unsee what you hear too clearly. The right meant sail, a new name, a new labor, a new silence. Some looked relieved, some looked numb. One smiled. That scared me the most. I was called, stepped forward. The officer didn't look up. He just scanned my legs, marked my back, checked a list. Then, right, just that. As if he were choosing bread, I nodded, didn't speak, because somewhere deep inside, I had learned that sound made you visible, and visibility could hurt. One man behind me whispered, "Where do we go?" Another said, "Forward." A third, "Does it matter?" The silence that followed was louder than all three. The list was finished, the book closed, and the ship groaned like it was relieved to be rid of us. ... But not because it cared, only because empty vessels float better. They told me I made it, that I was one of the lucky ones. I nodded. ... Because what else can you do when someone hands you survival, like a receipt? I stepped onto land. It felt wrong, too still, too dry. The earth didn't shift beneath me, but I did. Inside, everything was still moving. They gave us water, real water, not from the sea, not from the sky. It tasted like forgetting. I drank too fast, coughed, laughed, almost cried. Then I drank again. They marked us with numbers, again, on paper, on skin, this time with ink, not chains, but it still held. I was sold to a man in blue. He smelled like leather and authority. He didn't ask my name, didn't tell me his, just nodded at the paper, tossed me a shirt, and walked away, expecting I would follow. I did, of course I did. Work came easy, not because it was easy, but because effort was the only thing I still remembered how to give. I chopped, I hauled, I bled, and at night I slept without dreaming. One night I woke up and couldn't remember my mother's face. I waited for the panic. It never came. I just stared at the ceiling, listening to my breath, and thought, maybe that part of me stayed on the ship. They said the voyage lasted for weeks, but I lived a lifetime in that hull, a quiet one, an unspoken one, and I left pieces of myself in every creak of that wood, in every cough that wasn't mine, in every chain I never wore, but still carried. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I still hear the sea, not the waves, the weight, the breath of hundreds, pressing up through the floor, telling me they remember, even if no one else does. I didn't drown, but I didn't survive either, I continued, ... And that, somehow, is a kind of haunting. If you're still listening, thank you, not for staying awake, but for being willing to walk with me, even if just in your mind. Some voyages don't end, they echo, and some ghosts don't haunt, they whisper. So sleep now, and if you dream of the sea, let it be calm, let it be kind, because even water sometimes remembers how to forgive.